for any story or product or service, there are hundreds of places that you could pitch it. And that's when it becomes overwhelming, because you just sort of almost spread yourself too thin. So that's why I kind of say to people, set yourself a goal for the next 3 months or the next 6 months.
Hello and welcome to the Brandtuned podcast, which discusses all things brand related, including the essential trademark and IP dimension. I'm your host, Shireen Smith, IP lawyer, brand manager, and author of Brandtuned, the new rules of branding, strategy, and intellectual property. Before the episode begins, I just want to mention the Brandtuned accreditation course, which is in the pipeline. It will cover how to create a brand strategy, taking account of intellectual property as it arises during the process. Brand protection considerations impact the choice of names or other brand identifiers. So to make better branding decisions, register your interest at brandtuned.com. The link is in the show notes. Hello and welcome to the Brandtuned podcast. My guest today is lucywerner, who's the founder of The Wern, a PR and design consultancy for startups. Lucy, welcome to the Brandtuned podcast.
Hi, Shireen. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a bit more about your background and what you do, Lucy, please.
Yeah, of course. So my background predominantly is in PR agencies. I've worked for some of the big London award-winning agencies, and I've been in-house. And I set up my own consultancy about 7 years ago because I just could sort of see a gap in the market for early stage startups that couldn't necessarily afford the big agency fees. Mm-hmm. And so now my business is sort of split between the Wern consultancy, where I do kind of PR work for people. And then off the back of my first book, Hype Yourself, I have a DIY platform to help people basically learn how to do it for themselves. And then along the way, the co-founder of my children, Adrian, joined, and he heads up the branding and design side, which is where you and I have kind of met in the past as well. So he kind of does the same thing. So we're sort of a little bit of a one-stop shop, if you like, for people who need to build their brand and then get themselves out into the world.
Great. So you work predominantly with smaller businesses, or what sort of size are they?
Yeah, I would definitely say, I mean, they're typically on the kind of consulting side. They are on the sort of the VAT registered, so it's not like completely sort of beginning days. Those are kind of the ones that I push on the Hype Yourself side. And typically I go against that agency grain. I don't like to do retainers. I like to come along with people. I like to hold their hand, show them the way, spend 4 or 5 months with them, and then pack them off. So typically it's not a huge company, because either they can then afford to do it, bring somebody in to do it, or they'll have an agency that they have full time.
Sure. Yeah, so when we were discussing this episode, I asked if we could sort of discuss how to have a strategy to create hype for a business maybe that's creating a course. I think you yourself are actually creating an online course. How would you create your strategy around your brand strategy in order to, promote what you're doing and make maximum impact? So
yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to kind of tucking into that topic area. And I think first things first, it's actually thinking what your business objectives are. So in this instance, in the example you've given, it's great. That's an online course. We're trying to get sales for that online course. Whatever your business is, your goals might be to attract investment, to get stocked in a retailer, to get distribution. You really need to be super clear on what that goal, what you want the PR to be supporting, because that can really help shape it and stop us getting distracted. So, if you want to be stocked by a distributor, for example, that's going to change which publications you might want to be in versus if you're trying to get a consumer buying an online course from you. And I think the biggest myth that I think there is around PR is that it's just getting into a newspaper, it's writing a press release and sending it out to a journalist. And actually that's one strand of PR known as publicity, whereas PR is everything you're doing which is managing your public reputation. So me being on this podcast with you right now is PR for me and my business, and you've already allowed me to talk a bit about my book. So I'm already PRing myself just by being a guest on this podcast with you, because I'm now being positioned alongside you, like equally for both of us. We are tapping into each other's audiences when we co-promote this episode together. And I think people ignore things like podcasts or online talks or being featured in somebody else's newsletter, and they think, oh, it's all about getting a journalist. So actually I would say after your business goals and making sure that your PR aligns with that, the next bit of your strategy is looking at your customer and where they're playing, whether that's a B2B or a B2C customer. And then it's about I always get people to design what I call a media mind map. So almost just throw it down on a piece of paper. Which events are they going to? Are they in co-working spaces? Do they go to awards? Which podcasts they listen to? Which online blogs? Throw it all down on a piece of paper and then start the connecting steps. So if they're listening to a podcasts, pick 3 to 5 podcasts that you think are a good fit, listen to them, start to get a feel of the type of guests that they have and approach them. Now, for some people, speaking on a podcast is terrifying. They're quite happy to sit and listen, but they don't want to do that. So maybe writing is your thing. I really like platforms such as Medium because they have different Medium publications on there. So Medium is a US based blog, if you don't know it, and you can actually write an article yourself, pop it in your drafts, and then you can find publications on Medium to pitch to. And that's really useful if you have a very specific segment such as marketing or thought leadership or wellness, parenting, whatever your area is, there's a title on there. So if they then publish your article and all those titles have submission forms on there, it's exposing your writing to a much broader audience very quickly, which is ultimately what it's all about. In order to grow our sales, it's about growing our audience.
Sure. I think obviously it goes right back to your strategy in terms of your brand. What's the brand idea? How are you going to win, I guess, and then developing some objectives around how you're going to achieve your goals. So say you decide that you want to be known as accessible, having an accessible, simple course, and therefore, and your audience might be, I don't know, small businesses. So how do you then translate that? And you want to attract a following for your course. How do you then translate that into deciding exactly what to do in terms of promoting yourself? Yeah, podcasts, but small businesses that help businesses to develop their business might be one.
I always liken it to if you imagine that you were almost like a WPP creative agency, and you think about all of the different divisions. So I would be the PR division, if you like. Somebody else might be marketing, somebody else might be legal, somebody else might be finance and HR. Because if somebody's a small business owner and they are interested in PR, there's a good chance they're also going to take my recommendations for other service-based businesses for small business. So actually partnering with other people, building relationships with other people that are a complementary service, and having your kind of unofficial WPP agency of other people is actually quite a nice way to do it. So it's interesting when you were saying about the words of accessible. I think there's some experts who are very accessible, and I think there's some who are very kind of, if you want any of my advice or tips, you have to pay for me. And so I think it's just making sure that your brand aligns with those other people. And I think it's the same even when you're saying yes to a podcast. It's always good to look at the other guests and think, if I was on a panel with these other guests, would this fit with my brand, or would I be the odd one out?
Yeah.
Or, you know, on the flip side of that, you know, is this person being very inclusive? Do I actually need to give up my seat on this podcast and put somebody else forward that does a similar thing to me that I think deserves that opportunity? So yeah, I think kind of partnering with other people who are your unofficial board would be my answer to that. Because also then you know, there's that opportunity to even develop that relationship further and have referral or affiliate relationships with them. I know for a fact that I do a monthly newsletter, and whenever I list anything that I'm selling, nobody clicks on it. But when I put articles or things to buy of other services, people always click on them.
Really?
So yeah, my newsletter is really good for other people, not me. But I think it's because I'm aggregating that content, so they're trusting what I'm saying. And most people, if they are following me, it's because, you know, I am catering to that sort of early stage startup audience.
Yeah. So working in co-working places is an ideal way to collaborate with like-minded business people, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Do you know, when I started out, I kind of sort of did a little experiment with myself. So I had co-working spaces was one of them, and I definitely did. This is obviously pre-pandemic, so you could actually do physical talks. So I did a lot of physical events where I would do a lot of free talks to build my audience and network when I was starting out. I did a lot of podcasts. I also went to a lot of female founder and women in business type events. I think the thing that actually worked the hardest for me was putting on my own event. Now, obviously, I know that most people are interested in speaking to journalists. So for my first event, I pitched how to pitch to journalist event, and I invited 3 journalists that I wanted to pitch to be on my panel. So my favorite publication is Courier magazine. So I invited a journalist from Courier magazine to be on my panel. And 6 months after that, she invited me to be on a Courier panel. And actually, I still get new business leads from doing that event now, you know, 2 years later. So I would definitely say if there's a publication or a place that you want to be in, you're building an authentic relationship with them and taking that time to nurture and develop it is a really great way to go about it. Typically with promotion, it's not an overnight win. So I always think as well, it's about getting your product right, figuring out what promotion is working, and then kind of rinse and repeating it so that you can keep doing that cycle. But even whether it's traditional or very digitally led promotion, I think you can never start too soon. And I still see stuff appearing 6, 9 months, a year later from pitches, you know, a year ago.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. So it's always, you're never not launching. You're always launching. It's not like you have this one moment. It's and you know this because you've got, you know, you've got at least 2 books. How many books have you got now?
Yeah, 3 actually.
3. This is your 3rd.
Yeah.
So you know, it's like you're always always promoting your books in a way.
Yes. Yeah. It's all very time consuming, I guess, to identify publications and to know what you want to actually achieve by once you've identified a publication even. Are there any sort of tips you've got for tackling that better?
No, I have the same battle for myself and for my own clients. It is time consuming. And especially when you're pitching out a story, you know, you could spend a whole day pitching and maybe a handful will reply. That's not unusual. I guess that's why, you know, for any story or product or service, there are hundreds of places that you could pitch it. And that's when it becomes overwhelming because you just sort of almost spread yourself too thin. So that's why I kind of say to people, you know, set yourself a goal for the next 3 months or the next 6 months. You know, I'm going to try and get 1 podcast a month, or I'm going to try and do 1 talk a month, or this is the 1 publication I really want to be in. Because with any print publication, even like with Courier, for example, there's an editorial team of 12, 15 journalists. You need to figure out who's the right one, which section you want to be in, and then take your time to nourish and build that relationship. And I always sort of think it's good to have a sort of unofficial tiered list. So maybe Courier Magazine or Forbes or a TED Talk is your tier 1. And then maybe tier 2 is something that's maybe a bit more mid-level. And then you might have a tier 3, which you're like, this is easy. This is a site that they give you the questionnaire, you can just fill out the Q&A and submit it, and they're pretty much likely to run it. And that's just good for SEO and to keep, Google spiders happy that there's content going out there with inbound links to my website. So I would kind of sort of, dedicate your time against each of that. But yeah, the time-saving one, typically all entrepreneurs, all business founders, solopreneurs, we're all time poor, which is why I also think it's worth sticking to the thing that works best for you. If you're great at talking, do the podcast. If you're great at writing, do the blog posts. If you love public speaking, people can really feel that energy. They can feel the enthusiasm, and we enjoy it when people are having fun. So if you're hating using Instagram, for example, people can sort of sense that. So I almost sort of think, if you don't want to be on a certain channel, don't force yourself to do it. Invest in the time, in the space that you want to be in, that you can really show off your skills.
Right. And how far in advance should you be planning your strategy for hype? So
it's a really good question. If you are expecting to be in a long lead publication like Vogue magazine, for example, that has a 6-month lead time. We have in PR what we call Christmas in July. And actually, it's sometimes even in June now. So if you want to get, even at the moment, I've just done a pitch for Courier magazine. So we're recording in December 2022. The pitch is for the shopping page. It's not going to appear till May. So I'm pitching 5 months out to get a product included. So for a monthly magazine or bi-monthly, you're looking at like 5 to 6 months in advance to be, on the month that you launch. Other magazines, if you're looking at a weekly, they might be working about 6 to 8 weeks out. And then obviously online, even if, like now, I would say even for online, so we're on Tuesday, the 7th of December today. So I would say if anybody came to me now and said I'm still pitching for Christmas, I'd probably have given up by this point. So I would still, even for online, I mean, that's more of a specific occasion. So that's already probably much going to be wrapped up. But I would already be looking at January, New Year, New You, February half term, like those types of occasions already. And for travel, they're already looking at summer holidays,
Okay.
So it just depends how kind of consumer based you are.
Okay. So when you're creating your brand, I mean, how do you help people? They come to you and you help them with their personal brand. Tell me a bit how you might help someone.
So if somebody kind of arrives, on my doorstep, it depends if they're working with Adrienne on the kind of the brand strategy and the visual, or if they're coming to me and they've already kind of got their brand, but maybe I'm just helping to really refine, I guess, the communication messaging and their key messages. Typically they will kind of come to me with, I've got a product or service to launch, and we will go through what the business objectives are, what the communication objectives are, what are the key messages, how they describe themselves. Then we will move into their press toolkit, because we can't do anything without it. So making sure we've got photography, whether that's the product or the founder, that there's a bio of the founder, and that there's a bio of the business, which in PR we call the boilerplate, which is basically a really jazzy term for your business bio. It's because historically press releases were copied verbatim, and the boilerplate was the bit about the business that never changed. It was on the printing press. So it was that's why it's called that. So yeah, you need a kind of a business bio for yourself. It is likely you will need a press release. It might not be the thing that we use to pitch out, but it's a good reference document. So when I'm typically pitching to media or a podcast or whatever, I will have a bespoke pitch in the email, and that press release is underneath, so they can pick out information if they need it. And then we would start to write a target hit list of who do we want to go after. And I would also sit and work with them on their pitch angles. So for any person, there could be maybe 3 to 5 different angles for how we're going to pitch that story out. So one might be business related, one might be female founder related, one might be a bit more human interest, so giving a bit of what I say, showing a bit of ankle, showing a bit of your personality. It could be all different for every single person, so it's hard to sort of summarize, because it's not a cookie cutter, and every single person and product and story is different. But in general, there is a kind of a strategy piece, a media toolkit piece, and then there's the bit where I go off and I go really quiet, where I'm basically just on the actual pitching side. And like I said, that can take time to build momentum. And I think that's also another big myth with publicity, is that you can just sort of get it and it comes overnight. And actually, it can take weeks and months.
Yeah. So if somebody's starting a new business and they have no brand, do the two of you collaborate and help them?
Yes, we do. So what can happen on the brand side is Adrian will work with them, right at the very beginning on their brand strategy, and or really work through the vision, mission, purpose piece of it. Then he will move on to the visuals, and sometimes we try to stay away from them because they're very complicated. We do sort of basic Squarespace websites. If they move into WordPress and web developers, it's a whole other world. So we try and stay out of that. And then sometimes, the baton will be passed. And then I then count once he does the foundation work, and then I launch them. So actually we wrote our books in the wrong order. We should have written brand yourself first and then hype yourself. Because most people actually try and hype themselves before they've really looked at their brand. They think, oh, I've got a logo and a color palette, I have a brand. And actually, when you drill deep into that, you realize that they don't always know who they are and what they're about, or they can't say it succinctly. And actually, for PR purposes, you need that. Sometimes startup founders are the worst. The type who are like, every 3 months have changed the business goals, or who the target audience is, or what the objectives are. They're the worst ones to do PR for, because I'm like, the messaging has to stay the same for 6 months minimum. Otherwise, I cannot do my side of the job. So it's
actually I think it's often because you're responding to the market. You might have an idea, but until you're out there doing your thing, you don't really know how people are going to respond, and therefore your strategy might well have to change. So maybe there needs to be, I don't know, a year or 6 months during which people are just working things out, and they need something very straightforward, malleable. I
think, to be honest, if I was any business starting out and I was time poor and cash poor, which we often are when we're starting out, I would actually go all in on email marketing. And the reason I say that it's not that I don't value what I do for PR. It's the only way I've actually built up my own business. But because I know how to do it, it is easy for me. So I can do it day in, day out. But there is not the financial metrics to measure the value on PR like there is for, say, digital marketing or Facebook ads, where you can physically see how much you're putting in and what you are getting back. It's much, much harder to track. I definitely think you do need to think about brand and how you're positioning yourself. If you're Googling yourself, you have a personal brand. So it's 100% important to control it. But I do see this sort of danger of somebody curating a lovely Instagram feed, for example, or a slick website, and they spend all their attention on creating beautiful photos for Instagram, but they're not actually collecting any of that audience data or having a direct relationship with them. And we see it when you see all the memes going around, like when Facebook and Instagram sort of have their annual outage, or like everybody suddenly giving advice, being like, see, I told you, this is why you need an email marketing list. But the reality is, we don't own our customer data if we're only engaging with them on social media channels. So it is important to try and own a piece of your own customer data. So for me, I would say all roads at the beginning should lead to your email marketing. And you can use PR as a free tool to do that with guest posts, or if you know that that's your objective, then every time you're doing a podcast, you're like, make sure you sign up to my monthly newsletter, for example. Whatever your call to action is, you can bring it through every time you're doing your promotion. But I think it's the bit that people ignore, because they think, oh, I don't like opening newsletters myself, or I actually only like Instagram, or I only go on LinkedIn. It's all fine, but at some point, those can disappear, and you need to have a backup.
Yeah, very true. So talking about ownership and things, do you talk about IP to people who come to you about?
No, I tell them to read your book. We will talk to them on a very top line level. In our book, we mention there's a few ways that you can check the name of your business. Obviously, you don't need to be too worried about the incorporation name on Companies House, which is what some people really panic about. You're like, that's just, nobody's even going to see that in the public domain. It's fine, like that's okay. Typically, most of the time when people are coming to us, they've already created a product name. It's very unusual for somebody to come to us without a product name. So we are normally a bit safer in that part. But I have sometimes had some crisis PR calls with people who's nothing to do with us on the branding side, who then come to me because they've got into a legal scrape because they have adopted a name inadvertently, and it normally is. And I do think in general, the business world can sort of fire off a warning shot, and that is normally a lot. But for some of us, that can, even the warning shot can be quite terrifying.
The name is so important to make sure you've cleared and can use without, because everything you're doing is promoting a name. Obviously,
exactly.
Use your own name, it's a lot simpler.
As actually part of the reason I actually just called it so I'm Lucy Werner. I'm quite often just called Wern, or the Wern. It was just a nickname. So when I incorporated my company, that was it. And then I regretted it, because actually when you're trying to spell out the Wern to people on the phone for an email address, it's quite tricky. But actually from an SEO perspective, it's great. And it's just sort of kept and
it's distinctive.
It stands out. I think it's why we typically, there is a bit of a joke in the communications world, though, that all like the PR and advertising and marketing agencies are all named after the owners. But that is the safest way. It is my own name. We've actually started to trademark some of our programs where we've got a bit more I guess we're trying to have more ownership of it. And actually I was really surprised when I brought Hype Yourself out that there wasn't more around Hype Yourself out there. So we kind of got some UK stuff sorted around that. I'm kind of like, oh, somebody could completely steal it in the US, and that may happen, but for now we're safe. And I'm focusing on a UK market, and I have a lifestyle business, so it's unlikely I'm going for global domination anytime soon. But it's I think if you don't know anything about legal, it's actually quite scary.
It must be, especially because it's all quite confusing whether a domain name is enough or isn't enough. Traditionally, people assume if a domain name's available, that's all they need to worry about. So that, or if a company is available to register. So that there's a lot of pitfalls, I think, for the unwary around that. So what do you think somebody should do should really focus on to build their brand in the desired way that they decide that, in their strategy that they're all about? What would you really double down on as,
I think it is really thinking about, right in the very early steps of your brand strategy, you are looking at your values. And I think the values is that piece that people ignore, and they just think, oh, that's for big business. I don't need a big business strategy. But actually, when you know what your values are, it's going to really help you with what you can say yes to, and what you should be saying yes to, what you might need to say no to. Particularly when it comes to, as your business grows, you might be invited to do brand collaborations. You can really think about, like, does that brand align with the values of my business? And it will also help shape like which podcasts, which events, which workspaces, because they're all, some co-working spaces can be very corporate, some co-working spaces can be very creative and
Regis, for example.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, the original co-working space. Exactly, 100%. And there's neither of those are right or wrong. It's interesting. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I did an exercise where there's a group that you and I are both part of on Facebook, where I was asking for feedback on my book covers, and I got really torn apart. And then I realized, and I actually realized that that's not my audience. That's not who I typically attract as an audience. And on other social channels,
because they're business people, aren't they?
They are business people, but I think I think we typically attract the creative entrepreneur type. Mm-hmm. When you look at our wider customers, they're normally consumer facing, or they're service-based businesses that are really focused on consumer. We have worked with B2B as well, but I think they're B2B with more of a quirky personality. Mm-hmm. And I think in general, like when you look at that group, it is probably majority quite corporate B2B. So mm-hmm. to them, my book is a complete eyesore. Mm-hmm. Because that's not the sort of thing that they would want to pick up and read. And I had to sort of take a step back and be like, actually, when I'm asking for feedback on my business or for development, it should be with the right audience that share the same values and want to be in the same space as you. So I think that's why, going back to the values, it can shape everything. Because I think, especially if you're starting out and you're seeking advice, you need to be seeking advice from people who you aspire to be like, not just any stranger on the internet that you're kind of thrown together in a space and you think, oh, they might be able to help me. It might be they're completely the wrong fit and then steer you down the wrong path.
Yeah, that's a really good point about brand values. Although it can be really difficult for people to understand what values. I mean, values is just such a big sort of generic term.
Yeah, I mean, Adrian would always sort of say, if you really struggle to define your brand values, he would get you to ask, your parents or your best friend or your partner or people who you work alongside, because they will often see values in you that you don't see in yourself. Mm-hmm. And so it can be quite for British people, it's disgusting to go and ask, for public feedback. Very worthwhile exercise.
Yeah. So just to finish off, Lucy, is there a brand you particularly admire, and if so, why?
So one of the ones that we love, I say we because me and Adrienne kind of, sometimes we pull out different answers, but this one comes up together quite a lot. Is actually Who Gives a Crap toilet paper.
Oh yes, I love their toilet paper and their whole approach.
Yeah, and I think there's a few reasons why I love it. One, because they really do things differently. They are using a household product that hasn't really been innovated in years. We all need to use it. And typically, when you think about supermarket toilet roll, you can probably actually visualize the puppy, the kind of the peach, the perforated pattern on it. And they've just come out with these like really wild and wacky paper wrappings for their toilet rolls. It's a subscription base, so you don't end up with all this plastic around it. They do loads of charity work affiliated with it, so you sort of feel like you are doing something for the greater good. And obviously they know their target audience so well, so they know they're kind of aiming it at families or creative types. So quite often in our most recent box, they come in huge boxes of like 36 rolls or something. When we undid the cardboard box, there was a huge mural inside for you to colour in. So it was suddenly, as we're all in lockdown, was like, what the hell are we going to do? It's okay, we'll order some toilet roll from them and we've got a fun activity. And quite often I see friends who actually collect the papers of the toilet roll and do things like that. And actually they did this hilarious thing recently where the pop star Harry Styles did a photo shoot with Dazed magazine, and he was in all this flamboyant clothing, as he is, and they kind of did this newsjacking social media piece, and they were like, think Harry Styles has actually been taking influence from our packaging. And so they had a photo of Harry Styles in the Dazed magazine photo shoot next to different wrappings of their festive toilet rolls to show that he was stealing their style. And I just thought it was so fun and playful and tapping into the zeitgeist without really costing them anything. It was such a nice shareable piece of content. And it's basically a bog roll, when you can make a bog roll fun and creative and you've got people talking about it on a podcast, you're doing well.
Yeah, that reminds me to order some more from them.
There we go. We are not affiliated on this show.
Well, actually, I find that ordinary loo rolls are far too thick, and I prefer theirs because it is actually thinner in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
She'll be looking for sponsorship from you next. Who gives a crap?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lucy.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the Brandtuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtuned.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you, and bye for now.